You are listening to Practical and Woo by Mindset and Manifest. My name is Eden, and I invite you to embark on a journey with me to explore the practical and spiritual edges of the unknown for the purpose of allowing you to embody and empower yourself uniquely as you are and to intentionally create and live a life of freedom and fulfillment. Each week, I am going to discuss topics such as energetics, reality creation, manifestation, astrology, tarot, and more to help empower you to live beyond perceived limitations and to practically design your life so it feels like absolute magic every step of the way. Let's dive in. Well, hello, brilliant soul. The other day, I came across a quote that I've never heard before, and it absolutely stopped me in my tracks. It said something like, "The compass was invented before the clock because knowing your direction is more important than knowing how long it takes to get there." And I wish I could give credit to where credit is due. And if you know who originally said this, please let me know. Nevertheless, I couldn't deny the light bulb moment for today's episode. Now, I don't actually think this episode is about clocks or even about time. I think it's about something much deeper and more important that lies under the sentiment, like a pulsing, energetic truth. And when I tune into it, I realize that this is going to be a conversation about orientation. When considering our life journey, it can be very tempting to wonder how long something will take. How long will it take before I'm good at this, before my business succeeds, before something grows? How long will it take for me to feel confident, beautiful, at peace? How long will it take before I meet my person? Time feels like this subtle barrier to entry on our dreams, wishes, and desires. And when we think we have something and then lose it or it doesn't pan out the way we hoped, we wonder how long until we can find it again. Before I met my significant other, I remember experiencing a different relationship fizzle out. It was one that I was really excited about. And my first instinct when this happened was a sense of, ugh, I don't want to do this again. How long do I have to wait this time? I can still feel the frustration emanate through my bones. And even though I chose to persevere anyway, not everyone does. So the question is, how do we get time to be on our side instead of part of the journey that exhausts us or has us feeling like we're on a merry-go-round tilt-a-whirl hybrid? If I were to be able to tell you that you'd have your dream in exactly 6 years, what would you actually know? Perhaps the timeline, sure, but would you know whether or not the allotment of time was worth investing in or potentially spending? You wouldn't know if the dream you thought you wanted actually felt worth it on the back end. You would just know how long it took to get there. So maybe it's not the clock that we need to put our faith into, but the compass. There are so many tools that we as humans have to measure the things around us. A thermometer answers how hot something is. A ruler is about how long it is. A scale tells us how much something weighs. A clock reflects what time it is. But a compass doesn't measure, it helps us orient. And then this answers questions about the direction that we should take. And in thinking about this more deeply, we can come to realize that without orientation, measurement is meaningless. Let's say, for example, someone tells you that they've been driving for 9 hours, but where are they going? Where are they coming from? Were they driving towards something meaningful, heart fulfilling, or have they been driving in circles? So, why do we build our lives prioritizing measurement over orientation? Why do we measure our income before we recognize whether or not the work feels fulfilling? Why do we measure the number of years we've been in a relationship before we ask whether we're more ourselves inside of it? Why do we measure the number of followers, listeners, subscribers, or friends we have before considering our impact? As a collective society, we've become extraordinarily sophisticated measurers. But is it true that we still need to work on our navigation and orientation prowess? Do we need to get reacquainted with the rhythm and direction of our lives in a similar way that our ancestors did before the Industrial Revolution? I think we might. Back then, time wasn't something to conquer. But with the dawning of the Industrial Revolution, time became something that wasn't participatory. It was the primary organization structure for civilization. Factories needed to synchronize workers, railroads needed to standardize their departures, schools needed their schedules. Soon, our societies were fundamentally coordinated through the keeping of time. And while I myself am a huge proponent of time management, this quote about compasses and clocks really jogged something in me. Have we accidentally promoted the timekeepers beyond their intended job? Where clocks can tell you whether you've arrived before or after schedule, it can't tell you anything about the life you're choosing to build. And this is an important distinction because we're not all moving towards the same finish line. Life isn't a race with one singular destination, it's millions of individual journeys unfolding simultaneously. But we have this developed habit of using each other's clocks to evaluate our progress and our lives. We say things like, well, I'm 32. I should totally have my own house by now. Or I'm 45. I should have a robust investment portfolio. My business has existed for 5 years, so it is meant to be bigger by now. Those other people have been able to accomplish more in less time, so that should be my case too. We convince ourselves that we're behind. But whom are we behind? What are we behind? Behind can only exist if we're traveling towards the exact same destination from the exact same starting line. So perhaps one of the greatest illusions of modern life is the illusion that everyone's clock is measuring the same journey, but it's not. So that means we're looking at other people's elapsed time while having absolutely no idea where they're headed or even where they're coming from. Perhaps this is the reason why comparison has become so corrosive. Not because comparison as a concept is always unhealthy, but because we're comparing measurements without first wondering whether the destinations are even alike. The more I've thought about this, the more I've realized that perhaps the deepest human crises aren't actually crises of time, they're crises of orientation. If you allow yourself to think about the kinds of moments in life when people feel they're most lost, perhaps it's after a divorce, losing a job, after all of the children leave home. These are the kinds of moments when we often wonder who we are, what's important to us, where we're going next. Pain isn't chronological, it's directional, which means that pleasure and fulfillment exist directionally too. We've taught ourselves to solve our problems through better planning, productivity, and time management, but we've forgotten to notice the wisdom of direction. To continue to bulldoze or accelerate towards our moving targets in the wrong direction will never get us where we're going, no matter how hard we wish it would. This realization is changing the way I think about something like ambition. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with being successful. I had these thoughts in my mind about being powerful, a world class business mogul, and I thought that meant I had to be efficient, learn more, work harder. And if I'm being honest, I have felt like I've gone in circles so many times in my life. And I have felt like I was speeding head first in a direction that felt scary and also not really for me. Nowadays, I prefer softness, depth, curiosity, and even still, I find myself measuring where I am in my life against other people's milestones. But when I allow my wandering eye to tell the story of my life, I then realize I'm abandoning the truth of my own journey of self. Perhaps human beings were never meant to measure themselves exclusively through chronological progress. Perhaps we as humans were never meant to ask how much time has passed. Perhaps we've been encouraged to ask instead what our life is pointing us towards. navigating the trajectory of our own lives like expert sailors on an excursion. Every yes and every no pointing somewhere, as well as every habit, boundary, discomfort, willingness to overcome, lesson learned, belief we're choosing to live by. Every day we're getting feedback that ever so slightly adjusts our compass. And where a 1 degree shift might seem insignificant today, across a whole ocean, it changes the continent you'd eventually reach. Your future isn't created only by dramatic turning points, but by repeated consideration of where you're oriented, where you're existing in any given moment. Are you moving towards the person you're wanting to become, or are you becoming by accident? We don't need to count things in our lives anymore. Our lived experiences aren't collectibles that sit on a shelf gathering dust. They're sacred moments of your becoming. It doesn't matter that your journey to something takes longer than someone else's, or that your achievements seem different. It also doesn't matter how old you are when you finally reach something you've been working towards. The real metrics are whether you're expanding your capacity to love, living with more integrity, and loving yourself and your life more along the way. The real consideration is whether or not your outer world is becoming a more accurate reflection of who you are on the inside. And maybe this philosophy we're exploring in today's episode is the reason there are people who accomplish extraordinary things by 30 and still feel profoundly disconnected from themselves, while someone else quietly changes careers at 52 and finally feels as though they've arrived home. Where the clock demands that something is early versus late, it's the compass that acknowledges both journeys have a right to begin. It's the compass that reminds us the importance of the moment we choose to turn towards ourselves. The invitation here is to notice the moments where you're wondering and asking how long something is going to take, and then pause. Allow yourself instead to wonder where you're being led. With this philosophy for life, you no longer need every season to look productive because you understand that every one has a purpose. The compass never promised the shortest journey, just the truest one. So allow yourself to use the clock to organize your day, but the compass to organize your life. Because a deeply aligned life has a remarkable way of redeeming every season that it required to unfold. And maybe this is why direction has to come before time, because knowing how long you've been traveling has never mattered nearly as much as knowing where your life is actually pointing. And if today all you do is stop measuring yourself long enough to consider this contemplation, you may discover that you were never as behind as you once imagined. You were simply being invited to stop staring at the clock long enough to rediscover your own inner compass. Until next time.